Hey everyone, and welcome back to Don't Open That Door. It's Justin, Nico, and Dan, and we're joined today by a very special guest. We've got Miles Doleac on the podcast. He's a man of many talents, including being an actor, director, singer-songwriter from what I've read, and he's directed films such as Hallowed Ground and Demons. Today we're going to be discussing his film, The Dinner Party. It's out right now. So first off, Miles, how are you?
Guys, I'm doing pretty well. Little concerned about the COVID spikes around the country right now, and even right here in my neck of the woods in Greater New Orleans. But you know what? I'm trying to be a responsible citizen and wearing a mask when I go out and keeping my distance. And my wife and I are healthy and well, as are our 5 dogs, who, to be warned, could go nuts at any moment. But yeah, no, I can't complain. I've been really heartened and humbled by the response to The Dinner Party. So despite all the crappy things that are going on in the world, I feel okay. I'm ready to get past this thing and get back to work, but otherwise we're doing just fine.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. And we definitely want to say as well, we here at Don't Open the Door would advise everyone to wear a fucking mask until such a time when we don't need to. So I guess
honestly, just keep wearing them after that too.
So I guess to lead off here, we've seen movies before where, that have kind of similar, I guess, maybe some similar tropes or similar things happening. So what were some of the big inspirations behind this movie? Where did you draw from, would you say?
Well, I heard a lot of comparisons, or have read a lot of comparisons between our film and films like Ready or Not, The Invitation, or even the series version of Hannibal. I had seen none of those things going into this film.
Oh, wow.
By the way, I have since binge watched all 3 seasons of Hannibal, which is exquisite. If you haven't seen it, it's absolutely brilliant. But the bones of this script came to me via one of my producing partners, Jim Boulian, and my co-writer, Michael Donovan Horn. So sort of the original idea was Michael's. And when it came to me, a lot of the characters were there. Not all of the characters who found their way into the movie were there. But I thought it had some interesting things going on. Primarily this idea that people who have suffered trauma oftentimes go down this really dark path of compartmentalizing that trauma and then even potentially becoming abusive themselves. And I thought, from a psychoanalytical perspective, that was just a really fascinating avenue to explore. So Michael and I started working on the script together. Ultimately, the character of Sadie, which plays such a large role in the final, was placed into the narrative and sort of became the flame around which all the moths revolve. And as we were working on it, I thought about a lot of movies. I thought about Eyes Wide Shut, all the way to like the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So it was a dark and stormy night, and the couple seemingly finds refuge in the creepy mansion, and there's this crazy cast of eclectic characters. And, thinking of Dan's criticism in your podcast interview about how all of the characters are a little bit over the top. Well, that was intentional. We wanted this kind of rogues gallery vibe, and I realize that's not for everybody, but we wanted all of these characters to be kind of in your face and larger than life personalities, so that, when Haley and Jeff encounter them, they're like, whoa, this is what exactly is going on here? Are all rich people this eccentric and outlandish and whatever? So that they are off balance from the very get, right? So yeah, those 2 films in particular, I thought about a lot in working on this, and I even directed a production of Rocky Horror, the stage version of Rocky Horror, a couple of years ago. So
That's sick.
So it was kind of fresh in my mind, but I also wanted this kind of moody kind of vibe as well, which I've thought a lot about Kubrick's stuff and Eyes Wide Shut in particular, and then the occult stuff. I've been a big fan of especially 70s occult horror, like The Exorcist, The Sentinel, Rosemary's Baby, The Omen, all that stuff, which some element or inspiration from one of those films seems to find their way into everything that I do. So I even wrote a film, you mentioned it, called Demons, which owes a great debt to those 70s horror films.
That's awesome, man. That's really cool. So I have to ask, you mentioned the psychoanalytical perspective. Is that sort of where the sort of like the creation of the insertion of the tarot is that where that derived from, or was it coming from more of like, I guess which came first for you, like the tarot or the characters, the like Arcana cards of the characters?
Well, I think the characters came first. Story is always paramount for me, but characters are by a razor's edge second. And I think it was you, Nico, that was talking about how, you're just a big fan of, delving deeply into the psyches of the characters. And I am too. And I felt like, we had to find these characters' histories and backstories. Some of them are revealed in the movie. Some are not fully revealed in the movie. And then we allowed those backstories and those histories, and then, of course, where they are in the narrative to inform the Arcana, to inform their various tarot readings. So, for example, the reading of Carmine being the Emperor, right? He's sort of the one that is holding court in this particular moment. It has not always been that way, and he, of course, came from a traumatic, abusive childhood as well. So it was this combination of where they had been and then where they are. But it began with the character first, and the backstory and the psyches and the traumatic histories that every one of these characters has experienced to one degree or another.
In spades, for sure.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, were there ever any other Arcana that you were thinking about using besides the ones that you appear in the film?
You mentioned the tower, I think, in your review. And we thought about that with regard to Jeff, but that was really the only one I think that we weren't pretty clear about. We might have debated a little bit with Vincent, and we settled on the magician because Vincent is sort of like the high priest of this cult, right? And we sort of debated. There are several Arcana cards that share some similarity. The Emperor and the Magician, for example, but ultimately, most of the Arcana stuff, it just seemed to write itself. Obviously, Sadie and the High Priestess, and Agatha and the Lovers, and Sebastian and the Fool. Jeff was the only one. I think the one that we did the most hand wringing, but we didn't wring our hands too very long. The Death card made absolute sense for Haley. And I love the fact that you caught, obviously, that the Death card does not necessarily mean that you're going to die. But I think that our hope as filmmakers were that that our audience would go, "Oh shit, she's going to die," right? So
foreshadowing,
right. So, but it made total sense, and we were worried maybe that it was too grim. So we have Vincent's line of the Death card can signal rebirth and whatnot, and maybe, you're constantly debating as a writer how much to give the audience and whether you're giving the audience too much or enough. And it's really hard to find that balance. And even what I found fascinating about your guys' review of the film is that you guys are literally, one of you is saying, well, I really liked how they explained the opera in detail and it's connected to their backstories. And then Dan's like, well, I really didn't like that at all. So Nico, if we hadn't done that, you wouldn't have liked the movie as well.
Yeah.
But Dan would have liked it better.
Yeah.
And this is what we're all always wrestling with as writers, right? It's like, okay, where do you draw that line? And there are always a lot of really angsty decisions, and ultimately you just have to say, hey, we're gonna go for it. This is what I think, and some people are gonna like it and some people aren't.
So I've got one more follow-up there about the whole writer's existential crisis, as it were, which we all feel. So you mentioned some strategies as a writer, like finding the balance between, for example, the duality of Dan didn't like something for the same reason that I loved it. So one of the major themes that you mentioned and was pretty clear in the theme was this element of trauma. How did you go about differentiating The Dinner Party from other films that use trauma as sort of a central theme in their in the runtime?
I really wanted this movie to be about the fact. Are we in the spoiler part of the show yet?
Not quite.
Not quite.
Okay, well, Well, because one of the central characters is sort of the axial character in the film has suffered the ultimate trauma, I think. I wanted all of the characters to be products of that, of some form of trauma, right? And to really have the audience ask the question, well, if these characters' parents or whoever weren't so shitty, would they have turned to this? Would they have been completely different people, right? So it's sort of like the nature versus nurture argument, right? Is someone's morality entirely experiential or about their conditioning, or is it about something else? And these people certainly had some horrific experiences as children. Would they have been different if that had not happened? I don't know. Maybe not. But it was a question that I wanted the audience to wrestle with. I mean, they're certainly pretty terrible now.
Nice little qualifier. No, that's really cool. That makes sense, man. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, you had mentioned like one thing is you can't please everyone, right?
Right.
Some people like it, some people don't.
Yeah. Damn.
And I think the three of us all understand that pretty well too, because we are all musicians. So we all work on our own music, write our own music. And, at a certain point, you can't really please everyone. So I noticed in the credits that you seem to have written quite a few of the musical compositions in the film. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, really, I just co-wrote the song that plays over the closing credits, Ash Wednesday. But that theme pervades a lot of the score. It keeps coming back. So on those bits where that theme is present, I'm technically a writer because I helped write that song. The composer I worked with, Clifton Hyde, who's one of my oldest creative collaborators and one of my oldest friends. We actually went to high school together.
Oh, wow.
Is just one of these incredibly, he's just a musical polymath. He plays 10 instruments. He said, you give him the vibe or the feel of what you want. And he's just right there. And I'm like, I think I told him going into this. So I want 9 Inch Nails meets Vangelis meets, Verdi. And that's pretty much what he delivered. And that was another point, and I appreciated you saying, Dan, another point that we made a really bold choice with some of this music, some of the score. And I knew that, it would turn some people off. But Clifton and I are both children of the 80s, born in the 70s, growing up in the 80s. And we were listening to those Tangerine Dream scores and the Vangelis stuff and Jan Hammer and you can probably hear all that stuff. We really gave into our childhood affinities in terms of movie scoring in this one. So a lot of that is present.
Yeah, I can definitely hear those inspirations. Absolutely. And also kind of given that, you're involved in so many different parts on this, you kind of, obviously just mentioned, a little bit of the film scoring, you acted in it, directed. How do you, I know, like, I'm a musician, like I said, and I also a recording engineer, mixing engineer, kind of all that. And I know for me, sometimes it's difficult to compartmentalize. When I'm trying to work on one part, all the other parts sort of kind of get involved in my head. How do you go about dealing with that and compartmentalizing that or compartmentalize it all? Maybe you don't, I don't know.
The only time I'm really able to compartmentalize are the moments where I'm in front of the camera. And fortunately, I approach acting in a fairly clinical way. Like I can be, talking about the Saints game or whatever, and when we start rolling, get into character. But when the camera is rolling and I'm in front of the camera, it is I'm in a sacred space and I'm doing this thing, and that's the only thing I'm thinking about. But in every other instance, it's impossible, and I've just given it up. But what I have done is to surround myself with very talented people and people that I trust that are going to give me the shot. They're going to let me know what they really think. And that starts with my partner in life and art, Lindsay Ann Williams, who's producer on this and played Sadie and designed the costume. She wore a lot of hats as well. My DP was very, very important on this one, Michael Williams. We had a very specific idea for the look of this film. I appreciated, I don't know if it was Nico or Justin that was talking about our use of color. We allowed ourselves to be inspired by Baroque painters in particular, like Caravaggio and Ribera, and their use of color. And the color palette, the grade sort of transitions into a more Rococo palette as you move through the film. I work with probably the best colorist in the business, Bradley Greer of Kyoto Color here in New Orleans. My editor, Jared Hollingsworth, and had a couple of other producers on this, Jim Bullion and Wesley O'Mary, and then Clifton, who not only wrote the score, but consulted on all of the opera stuff. Because I love opera, but I'm not an opera aficionado. And it was very important to me that the operas that are being talked about that play a prominent role in these characters' histories really made sense in terms of who they were. And I leaned heavily on Clifton in that regard. So, and then casting is 80 or 90% of the thing, when it comes to directing. If you cast the right actors, the rest sort of takes care of itself. Just if you let nature take its course, I mean, good actors who really connect to the part, actors who really, are in it. And you guys both mentioned, especially with regards to like Camille and Sawandi. I mean, these actors just gave it their own. They just dove in and, threw it at the wall and weren't afraid to look like absolute fools if that's what it took to get to the place where they needed to be. And I've always been blessed with pretty strong casts. And that really helps if you are directing and you are a member of that ensemble, to be able to trust the actors that they're going to get there with just a little push or a little nudge or a little course correction here and there. And that was certainly true of this piece. So the long and short of it is, I can't be an actor, take off my actor hat, be a director, take off my director hat, be a producer, because inevitably I'm going to be in the middle of a shot and somebody's going to ask me for a check for the caterer. That's just how it happens. So I just stopped fighting it. And I surround myself with people that I trust, good people who I know are going to bring their A game and who are going to keep me on my toes. I'm not always going to have the best idea. I'm not always going to be the smartest guy in the room. And I make it very clear that this is a collaborative effort. This is a communal effort from the get-go. And I want to hear opinions. And the worst I can say is no. And in every single movie, at some actor's version of the line shows up in the movie. Oftentimes 3, 4, 5 times, just because it was better than what's on the page.
Yeah, having a team is incredibly important. And that's something like on our podcast, like I think we all have our own kind of things that we rely on each other for. And, having the team there is a huge, huge help.
Yep.
So the one thing I do have to ask before we kind of get to our deep dive in the spoiler section is, so obviously, the film's release kind of coincided with the outbreak of COVID in the United States. So right. Was the filming and everything wrapped up before it really got to be a problem?
Yes, we actually shot this film last summer.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Last summer, yeah.
So
in the summer of 2019.
In terms of the actual release, how did, I'm assuming that process dramatically changed at least a little bit.
Yeah, we had intended to have a limited theatrical release for this. And we had some events planned in New Orleans and Los Angeles. And of course, that all went out the window with COVID. And the guys at The Wretched figured out the drive-in thing early on, and kudos to them. And then drive-ins realized they were the only game in town and started, trying to charge indie films an arm and a leg. And so we basically said, look, big studio films are going straight to streaming. So let's just embrace it, put everything we have behind it. And, the visibility of the film, in terms of the 5 films that I've directed, maybe has benefited. I mean, it seems to have more eyes on it. I mean, more critics reviewing it, more people talking about it on social media. I don't know if that's just because COVID leveled the playing field to some degree, or everybody's hungry for content. But at the end of the day, we don't seem to have suffered much from not having any kind of theatrical release.
Okay. And honestly, wow. And I'm glad that, that wasn't a massive, dent in your efforts. So this is actually going to bring, and this is for the listeners out there, this is going to bring a close to our kind of spoiler free. If you haven't seen the movie already, do yourself a favor, go ahead and watch it right now. And Miles, where can they catch this at? Where do you recommend they go see this?
All the usual suspects. the streaming platforms, iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, Fandango Now, Vudu, YouTube, Xbox, cable VOD. It's all over the place. If you're still into physical media, you can get yourself a copy of the Blu-ray or the DVD on Amazon, and it has a really cool BTS featurette, about 11 minutes long that a friend of mine, Travis Mills, shot for us on set, has interviews with actors and all kinds of fun tidbits. So, so it's out there, and those, I don't want to preference any streaming platforms, although some are better than others.
Certainly true.
For the production company, at least.
Right.
So, go out there and see this, and then go ahead and come right back here for this deep dive into the spoiler portions. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and lead into our spoiler-filled portion. Again, if you haven't seen the movie, please go ahead and check it out. So, Nico, why don't you go ahead and lead us off?
Right. So this is the one that I've been dying to ask this entire time. How did you come up with the decision to use the story of Lilith? And did we get that right?
You did. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. So how did that come to be?
Well, my wife is a huge feminist. Aren't we all?
Hell yeah.
And we debated the Eve and Lilith thing, but there's a little clue that really maybe only one, which is a quote from the book of Enoch that Sadie uses at the end. She shall become an abode for jackals, which is a direct reference to Lilith.
That's so sick.
Yeah. So that's the one overt reference to Lilith as opposed to Eve. And I just thought it was, at the end of the day, it just made more sense, especially the idea that she's retained her youth, because Eve did, in the mythology, grow old, right? So we would imagine if she were Eve, she would be a little older than, her early mid-30s, however old.
Just a little.
Right. Right. So it just seemed to make sense that, that Lilith, who was really sort of, according to the mythology, the first woman chewed up, spat out, that she would have a greater impetus to join Team Satan and get the hell out of there and take her revenge on all the terrible people.
No, that makes sense. Was the image that you had for her, was the character always the same, or were there any huge changes over the course of the writing process or the filming where something is drastically different in the cut that we have now, or was it all pretty steady?
Once she was created, she was pretty much steady. I knew I wanted this kind of elegant hippie witch kind of vibe. And that was informed to a great extent by Lindsay, and we were talking about costumes as we were writing, and so her costumes, and she wears the Greek laurel crown in the beginning, and the Greek style wrap dress. Her ceremony outfit is inspired by the ceremonial dress of the Minoan snake goddess. That we see a statue of the Minoan snake goddess in a couple of incarnation shots in the film. And so we imagine sort of Lilith moving through time in these different guises, and that she probably was the Minoan snake goddess at some point in her trajectory.
That's cool.
So yeah, but she was, but as I mentioned, Sadie was not in the original script when it came to me, and it's hard for me to even remember how the original script ended. Brooks came back and played a role, and it just didn't work for me, and then when Sadie materialized out of our, the creative ether, everything sort of fell into place. And of course, it allowed me to play in my favorite sandbox creatively, which is, the sort of Judeo-Christian mythos, which is the thrust of my PhD. I have a PhD in ancient history, and it's early church stuff primarily. So I just find that stuff utterly fascinating.
As you should. That stuff is super cool, and it goes way deeper than most people realize, I feel like. So that is quite a far cry from the next question I have for you. So there were a bunch of cool parts in the movie when it came to the gore, and I gotta give you shout outs for that. But in particular, the scene where we were you mentioned that you hadn't seen Hannibal, which makes me laugh. The scene where we're cooking Jeff.
Yeah.
Was there anything that you learned from your past projects that helped contribute to like the intensity of that scene? Because that was one of the main moments.
Yeah, well, I think that my production designer on this is Julie Tosh, who I also worked with on my last film, Hallowed Ground. And one of the things we were committed to was as much practical gore as possible. Right, we didn't want to be, creating blood effects and in post. We enhanced some, but all of the gore you see, save one shot, is practical.
Wow.
And so I just told Julie to go for it, and she did. And I think that's one of the things that I was told when I was trying to hire a visual effects, like a real visual effects artist to work on this, practical visual effects artist. And Julie has a good deal of expertise in that. That's not her specific niche. She's more of art design. And I was literally told by this jackass that you don't have the budget to have quality practical effects. I'm like, okay, Julie, this is what this jackass told me. And she's like, we're going to have quality practical effects. And she did it. She did a great job. I was like, let's just go for it. And we've always done that. Like there's an effect in my second film, The Hollow. We could not afford gunpowder squibs, nor could we afford an armorer to be on set the night we wanted to use them. So the squib, you probably haven't seen that film, but at the end of the film, there are all these squib gags. A headshot gag where brains fly out, and it's done with like bicycle tubing and garden sprayers and shit. It's like, and it looks great, and it's just a matter of being prepared, committing to it, and having canny, talented people, who are willing to, just MacGyver some shit up and say, hey, we don't have any money, but we've got ingenuity. We're going to make it work.
Yeah. So this is my last little bit before I'll let Dan take it away here. Did anyone else think Jeff looked tasty?
What is wrong with you?
You did a great job. I just have to ask for my own sanity's sake.
Are you talking about actual Jeff or what Carmine was cooking up?
Food Jeff.
Okay. Well, I mean, it was Carmine was working on I think it was a nice like pork loin or something there. And
thank you. Okay.
And he, there was I think he had some pink Himalayan sea salt. He was, garlic.
Beautiful.
Who doesn't love garlic, right? I mean, it was
right.
And he was massaging it with such flair, but obviously he takes pride in his work, so
that was great. I love that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And one thing we do talk about on our podcast sometimes is, special effects and CGI and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, that scene, with all the practical effects, it came off really well. And it looks very realistic. And I'm actually really excited that, that wasn't really CGI, and it just looks, you can tell, and it looks really good.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate
it does.
That. Yeah, you really can. I mean, it's. I mean, there's so much bad CGI out there, and I mean, as I don't know if your listeners realize this, but there are digital effects in every film, right? You're going to do something digitally, whether it's correcting something, a reflection removal, or something. So there's digital effects in every single film. But when it comes to gore and blood, and I mean, unless you have a lot of money to pay brilliant rotoscoping artists who, are going to spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours going frame by frame by frame to get it absolutely perfectly right, you can't pull it off. It's going to look like garbage. So what I have chosen to do instead is to begin with a practical effect, and then if it's not enough blood, just enhance it a little bit, give it a little CGI, boost. But when you begin with the practical, you can almost not see the CGI. And that's you don't want to, if you're looking at something and that's a computer effect, well, you've lost.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. Now, earlier, we were speaking about, having the team behind you. And one thing you really talked about was actors and actresses, and how when you have great actors, the rest of it kind of falls into place from there. So what was sort of the casting process and how did that go? And did you have particular actors in mind when you kind of wrote the characters, or I guess what was the thinking behind that process?
So I'm a creature of habit, and there are some actors that I've worked with that I offer most everything I do to, and one of those actors is Bill Sadler, who was in my first two films and who is, has become a friend, and I just love his work, and he's a tremendous guy and has great energy on set. But Bill is pretty booked up nowadays, so I knew I had to have an actor certainly in the role of Carmine that had a certain presence and this kind of seasoned Epicurean worldly grit, who could be both refined and charming and terrifying, all at once. And we work a great deal with Rachel Sheedy at Insurgent Entertainment, who represents not only Bill Sadler but also Bill Sage. And in having these conversations, he was one of the first names that came up. And, we were able to get him, and he was a great pleasure to work with on the film. But what also came out of that was the casting of Allie Hart. Because Allie had very few credits on her resume, but Rachel really pushed Allie. She was really, because Rachel had the script, because we were talking to her people, right? And she's this role of Haley. I've got a young actress who would just be tremendous. She is so magnetic, and you've got to read her. So Allie read for it and blew us all away. And I love Allie because she's this creature. She's so weird and ticky and sexy and innocent and angry and all these things, that I knew that this character had to go through such a vast journey from the beginning to the end of this film. And we knew we were going to put her through the ringer, and, she was going to get blood all over, and she's fighting, and she's in a swimming pool, and Allie was just game 100% of the time. And so that was really a result of our relationship with Rachel, her agent. And then Sebastian Sawandi just auditioned on, we put out a breakdown on Actors Access, and he was just one of hundreds of, or maybe thousands of people that auditioned for the role. And we, picked him out of those reads. Just thought he was fantastic. Camille and I have known each other for several years. She played a small role in The Hollow. We are also rep by the same agent, Angie Moncrief. And as we were developing Agatha, I thought of Camille. Because Camille's just she just has this very powerful sexual kind of energy about her. And we really needed somebody who was fearless. I knew she wouldn't have an issue with the nudity. I knew she was just going to pour everything she had into it and go for it. Mike Mayhall and I go back a long ways. He played Jeff. Mike cast me in an independent film in probably 2012, 2011 called Jake's Road. That was the first thing we collaborated on together. And really one of the things that really set me on the path to making my own films, because that was such a terrific experience. And Mike was making that film for $2 or something. But he had this wonderful cast of people, and I was just really inspired by being on that set. And Mike and I have kept in touch ever since. And Mike's also a talented stunt coordinator, so we kind of got a twofer with Mike. We hired him to play Jeff, and he was our stunt coordinator on the film. And then, of course, Lindsay lives with me and, would kill me if I didn't cast her, which she helped create. So, and then, we've got some old friends around the periphery, including Richie Montgomery as Brooks, who was in our last film, Hallowed Ground, Jeremy London, who's a friend, and Sherry Eakin, who was also in Hallowed Ground and The Hollow, and is so lovely. I would put her in everything if I could.
So one actor that you left out yourself, you obviously play Vincent. Did you always have that in mind from the beginning that you wanted to act in it, specifically the character of Vincent, or how did
I knew I wanted to act in it. I mean, at the end of the day, I started directing to provide myself more and better opportunities as an actor, because acting has always been my first love. But every movie, I sort of begin, except the first one, every other movie, I sort of begin with the premise of, I want to act in this. And then I sort of wait as the casting process develops to decide in what role, because, maybe maybe the juicy role that I've written for myself could lure a name that could elevate our film. And so I sort of hold out. I mean, in my second film, The Hollow, I explicitly wrote one role for myself of the two protagonists, and wound up playing the other role because that first role was number one on the call sheet. It's the biggest role in the movie, and actors like to be number one on the call sheet. So if I knew if I was going to get a name for that movie, I needed to lure them with that role. And that was the greatest decision I ever made, because the role I wound up playing was just perfect. And I got James Callis from Battlestar Galactica to play the lead in that movie. So originally when I was thinking of this, I was sort of debating whether to play, I could play Vincent, I could play Carmine, although I kind of wanted somebody a little older for that, or I could play Jeff when I'm all cleaned up and looking not my age. So we sort of batted all those ideas around and sort of settled on Vincent, maybe primarily because the character of Vincent is such a kind of observer of the proceedings, and it allowed me to be more directory at times. So yeah, I mean, the short answer is I knew I was going to. Vincent was one of the roles that was always being discussed as something that I would play, and we sort of settled into that in the weeks leading up to production.
Okay, and earlier you mentioned with Camille, the nudity and everything, and there's also a phenomenally acted scene and everything. Pretty creepy scene with necrophilia in it.
Right.
Was there ever any holdup with that, whether through the writing, the acting, or even like in other films that you've done, any other sort of times where an actor, it might be difficult to cast because of the subject matter?
I think as long as you're straight with the actor going in, I mean, obviously some actors don't want to do nudity, and that is, of course, their prerogative. But I think actors respect you being straight up with them out of the gate. I mean, I know a lot of horror stories about directors that got an actor on set and, forced an actor to do something that the actor wasn't comfortable doing, or surprised an actor with something that the actor wasn't comfortable with. And I just think that's absolutely heinous and terrible, and I would never do that. So I'm very straight. When I approached Camille about this, I said, the way your character introduction is my favorite character introduction in the whole movie, but it involves you being stark naked. And we're going to see it. We're going to see it all. And, some of it's shadowed and whatnot. But, and I just love the creep factor in that scene, the combination of creepy and the sexuality and Haley just trying to squirming her way around as Agatha sort of moves in for the kill. It just wouldn't work the same. It's integral to who that character is. So I felt in this particular instance, the nudity served not only the story, but especially the character. And that's really, when I make decisions like that in terms of writing, I don't, there's this, I don't know, this unwritten rule that you have to have some gratuitous nudity in your horror film. I don't believe that's true at all. I think it has to be right. It has to serve the narrative. It has to mean something. And I think it does here. And Camille was totally cool that, the more information you can provide up front, and then on the day, obviously you want to shut the set down to sort of necessary personnel only. You want to tell the actor exactly what we're going to see, where the camera is going to be, so there are no surprises. And as long as you're honest, an actor is generally pretty game. And the necrophilia bit, I don't know that even raised her temperature at all. I mean, I think, I think when I first read that, because that bit was in the script, at least the sort of skeletal version of it was in the script when it first came to me. When I read it, I was like, holy shit, necrophilia? That we're going there? So I think I was more disturbed by it than Camille was on her first read. She just bought it and let it rip. I mean, she was just totally game.
Camille's a real one.
That was crazy.
He does a really good job. And like you said, like with the, her introductory scene, I think you're exactly right. She portrayed that very well and really captured the feeling of, like, I think you said, like being trapped and moving in for the kill and sort of unease that's there. I think she did a phenomenal job with that.
Yeah. I will pass that along, or she will listen to this podcast.
I do think as well, that was one thing where, I think especially when you look at it from a certain perspective, if you're maybe like a younger guy, she's incredibly attractive. So you're like, oh, wow, look at that. Then all of a sudden, like, 3 scenes later, she's with a dead body. And I'm like, whoa, this one. So no,
there's some sleight of hand, sure. But seduction plays such a critical role in this movie, right? I mean, everybody is seducing everybody to some degree or another. And Haley is constantly being seduced. And so the seduction of that scene, I think, was very important in the sort of the kickoff of the narrative. And yeah, I just love the way Camille played it. Allie too.
One of the best scenes for sure.
Yeah. So, and actually, speaking of her, so the ending, we got to talk about that. I thought it was and we all did really, it was a really cool kind of, reversal when she kind of has her rebirth. And then she almost, she kind of takes people out ruthlessly. So, and to the ending point where she ends up, joining with Sadie. So I guess, was that always in the works? Was she always going to have that moment of rebirth and then join, as you said, Team Satan? Was that always going to be the way?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, when I'm working on something, and generally, Lindsay's in the room, and in this case, we have another co-writer, Michael Donovan Horn. We bat a lot of ideas around, but we pretty much knew that was the direction we wanted to go, because we thought, we knew we wanted Haley to live. So once you've made that decision, your options become limited. Okay, so she either kills Sadie somehow, or joins Sadie, or escapes. And of those 3 options, we thought joining Sadie was more interesting. And so that's the road we took.
Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pose my conspiracy theory here. So the cult itself, is this obviously, Sadie's ancient, she's, lived through the centuries. So I'm assuming that there's been multiple iterations of this cult. Am I imagining things here, or is this actually how that happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sadie continues to build this cult around her person, and yes, it's made up of different individuals over ages of time.
Okay, and I guess just kind of one last thing from my end. So particularly, so I did notice, and kind of take it back to the gore a little bit. So it really felt like you picked your moments, and not just for the gore. I think, coming from a perspective where I've seen some horror movies that are literally just bloodbaths from start to end, straight bloodbaths. Now, I will say that I was more taken aback by scenes in your movie than scenes in those. And the rationale behind it is because I think the switch, from going from cerebral, we're discussing the opera and we're high society, going from that to, oh, by the way, we've chopped up your significant other, and here, why don't you take a bite? That interplay is crazy. And I remember, my sister oftentimes watches, I tell her what movies we're watching, and she watches them too. And I remember specifically when they got to that scene where, Carmine is chopping up Jeff, she texted me, wait, what's happening now? And it was incredible. It was incredible. So I guess, I guess the question is this: do you purposefully pick your moments like that so when they do happen, it's just like a gut check, or how do you design something to have maximum impact on the audience like that?
I think it is a combination of, at our level, of budgetary caution or necessity and dramatic effect. So I think it's a combination. So going in, we literally don't have the budget to create one spectacular gore effect after another. But we also didn't feel like we needed it in this film. And right. A lot of my favorite films do just this. So a film I really love is Alien.
Hell yeah.
Right?
Hell yeah.
So Alien really does that. It really pulls its punches. You don't even see the fucking alien until the end, except for the one that comes out of John Hurt.
Yeah.
Right. But there's this foreboding specter of something terrible is about to happen, and it builds up and builds up and builds up, and so then when it happens, there's this release, right? This catharsis. I mean, Jaws is like that. I mean, until the third act of Jaws, you don't really see the shark all that much, and you don't even really see what's happening. I mean, you see an inner tube, and there's blood in the water, and right, but yeah. I think it is largely the result of the films that I most admire and that have inspired me, have taught me that it's, in my subjective opinion, it's better to pick those moments and pick those battles for dramatic effect because they have more dramatic impact. But it's also a perk because we don't have enough money to write a gore fest and to do it effectively. See, I mean, a lot of those movies that you're talking about, yeah, there's a lot of blood, but it's, the blood kind of looks like chocolate syrup and, or whatever. And it's, it's cheap CGI looking, or whatever. And I'm not interested in that. I'd rather pick my battles and do what I know I can do. Knowing your limitations, I think is very, very important. Know what you can accomplish and do that.
And that's actually perfect because that's actually, kind of the closing thing I had here. So, the movie's been out for a little while now. You've had some time, I guess, to think about it, some breathing space. Now, let's say, there weren't no limits, right? So budget wasn't an objection, nothing like that. Is there anything in this film that if you could pick one thing to go back and change or anything of the sort, is there anything you would change at all?
Well, after seeing Hannibal, I think I would have gone further with the food prep. Maybe thank you. Yeah. More food prep montage, something, maybe more bells and whistles, because as you see it now, it's just viscera and brain and body parts kind of like strewn out on the table. But like the way they prep that food in Hannibal, I just got the Janice Poon is her name. She was the food consultant on that show.
Beautiful.
And she's like a master chef, and like when Mads Mikkelsen first arrived to do the show, I think they were shooting in Vancouver or somewhere. The first place he went was to Janice's home to work on food, cooking and food prep. And he was like, for a moment I thought maybe I'm going to learn about cannibalism the hard way. Yeah. And of course, when you watch a film, you always think, I didn't really need that line. I thought I needed it. I could have lost that line. I could have shortened the scene. I wish I had hung on this shot a little longer. Those types of like little bits of minutia. Because, as I think Steven Spielberg said, you never finish a film, you just abandon it.
That's a good point.
But I will say that all things considered, of the 5 features that I've directed, this film comes the closest to really capturing the vision I had at the beginning of the process.
That's awesome.
In terms of visually, the script, the performances, the production and costume design. And I think that was because we had a very clear aesthetic in mind. And we communicated that pretty well to our department heads, and our department heads all got on board and they delivered it brilliantly. So yeah, there's always something you would change. It's like, Dan mentioned ADR. Or, I'm watching $100 million movies. I can tell it's ADR. And every time I can tell it's ADR too, Dan. I mean, it's like it drives me bananas, and it's like, so that tells me, okay, ADR is always going to kind of suck. It's never going to be totally integrated. So if there's any question about production sound, do it again. Give yourself another take. If you have to stick the boom in the actor's face or whatever, the clothing noise, which was especially problematic for Sawandi, because for some reason those jackets that he wore were just, so I probably would say just lose his lav, stick the boom in his face. If we have to take it out in post, we'll take it out. But on the day you're doing so many other things, and it's hard. It's hard. They're all hard, So most of my changes would be technical changes like that. Okay. That would have sort of improved the technical milieu of the film. But in terms of look, character, story, design, it's pretty close to what I envisioned.
I understand. That's perfect. That's perfect. Dan, Nico, anything else from you guys before I wrap?
Nah, I loved it.
Yeah. I mean, as you know, on the podcast, I wasn't a huge fan of it. I didn't dislike it. I actually liked a lot of the ideas behind it. And I think that was done very well, especially like, we mentioned the operas and things. Yeah, and I really liked the idea of that. So I'm actually really excited to see anything else that you might be doing in the future as well.
Definitely.
Well, I appreciate that, Dan. And I've got 4 other movies out there. So if you guys ever want to review another one, please do. But, Dan, what I appreciated about your criticisms they were specific. You had specific things that you mentioned based on a close watch of the film. And most of the time, the ADR thing notwithstanding, you were basically saying, I'm not saying this is bad. It's just not my cup of tea. It was it would not be my preference. I prefer a different choice, or would have preferred a different choice. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that is the way, an indie filmmaker is never going to, get upset about that. I mean, at least, most of them won't, because you're first, you watch the film and you put it on your podcast. Thank you. Secondly, you have specific notes. And thirdly, you're not being mean-spirited. You're just saying, hey, this is not really my kind of thing. There's too much, the intense dialogue about the opera, I could have lived without it. While also pointing out positives in the film. So, no apology necessary, Dan.
All right.
You might want to apologize to these guys for putting up with you, but not to me.
Oh, they already know that part.
Usually it's them putting up with me.
Yeah, definitely Nico. But no, so real quick before we wrap this up, do you have any kind of future works or anything else that's kind of in the pipeline that you can tell us about?
Yes, absolutely. So we are on the verge of announcing our new film, which is tentatively titled Demigod, which is a sort of a riff on the Cernunnos myth, the sort of myth of the great hunter, which is this dinner party takes place not entirely, but largely indoors, and this new one takes place largely outdoors in a forest, and it will also explore some mythology and ancient religion and that sort of stuff. The script is basically there. It's really just a matter of COVID and when we feel it's completely safe to be shooting again. And, we are in the process of reviewing the guidelines from our unions and talking with SAG. And, it's a lot. And it's especially for an independent film to commit to something like having a COVID supervisor on set who is a medical professional, right? And I mean, I think it's, absolutely 100% necessary, but it doesn't lighten the financial burden for already strapped independent filmmakers.
No, that's certainly true.
But we will be shooting that at some point in the next, year or so. We had originally been hoping for December, but we'll see how things go. We have also completed an early draft of a Dinner Party sequel.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I never imagined the word sequel would come out of my mouth, but we've got such a positive response to this movie, and like I said, a lot of eyes on it, and kind of, you know, people asking about, well, what's next for Haley and Sadie, and it really gave me the opportunity to explore that mythology further, and bring in some other ancient folks that will play a role in the next chapter, and so that's after the Demigod, the Kanunos film, that would be the next thing in the pipeline.
Actually, really, sequels are actually really cool, because when we were talking about sort of the cult rebuilding itself, you know, over time, I was actually thinking about asking, like, oh, I wonder if you're going to explore some of that a little bit more. But I was like, maybe I can't, you know, maybe doesn't want to talk about it, but that's actually super exciting. So
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm really, really excited about it, and where it's going, and who shows up, and so yeah. So that's in the pipeline.
Okay. And you know, if people want to, I guess, find what you're working on, if they want to see what you're doing, where can people follow you? Where can they find you on the internet?
So I am on Instagram and Twitter at Miles_Doleac, at Miles_Doleac. They can check out our work on our website, which is Historia Films MS for Mississippi, where we've shot all our films so far. It's HISTORIA filmsms.com. And Dinner Party has a Facebook page that you can check out. And we're pretty active on the socials. I try to be as active as I possibly can be within my limited technical abilities. And I would also say, you know, just go on IMDb and punch in Miles Doleac and give a look to one of our older films. If you like the Dinner Party, give one of our older films a look. They're all free to watch now on Tubi TV, which is a really cool service. If you watch it free, you have to endure commercials. But still, it's a cool thing. And of course, on all the streaming sites I mentioned before, iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, Hallowed Ground, Demons, The Hollow, and The Historian. If you like this one, check out one of those.
All right. Yeah. So that's been it from us here at Don't Open That Door. Miles, we'd like to thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure, gentlemen.
If you guys like what you hear, please go ahead and give us a follow. We're at DOtD Horror on Twitter and Instagram. We're also Don't Open That Door on Facebook. So from Dan, Nico, and Just, stay safe. And please, ladies and gents, don't forget, don't open that door. Have a good night, everyone.